Hi, I'm Evan Simpson, Head of Research and Instruction at Tisch Library, Tufts University. I'm here to talk today a little bit about electronic lab notebooks and libraries, opportunities and challenges in a fast-moving landscape. I'll start talking about the research landscape in general and some of the factors changing and pushing libraries to adapt new programs and services. We have emerging funding, publication, other mandates regarding research ethics, for instance, from the National Institutes of Health. We have new mandates around open data and new mandates around data management plans, actually being explicit, telling the government how a researcher is going to manage their data and make it available to the public. We have economic pressures in this funding landscape, government, private, higher education, and the institution at which researchers are working. Immense challenges in making sure that there's enough money to fund all of the research enterprises that an institution wants to engage in. We have local pressures, right, on faculty and researchers. More reporting and analytics are expected so institutions can raise their profiles. And there are new technologies that faculty and researchers are expected to grapple with and integrate into their research and their teaching. Looking to the future, there's a lot of questions right now about the future of higher education and emerging higher education models, including online learning. What will this mean for research? How will this change research and research funding? And an immediate pressure for all faculty and researchers, of course, is getting published, getting tenure, and continuing to get funding for their research. So in a sense, right now in this landscape, time very much equals money. Researchers are under tremendous pressure, and there are new mandates really pushing them to think broadly about their role and the way that they do their work. From a library perspective, there have been great changes in the landscape as well. Radical shifts to information seeking and discovery have really changed the way that we're able to work with users and users are able to interact with libraries. There are shifting and evolving collection development models, access over ownership, for instance, and the rising cost of serials and other resources continues to be a factor. In the future, who will own and control content? This is a big question for libraries today. And what is our role in such a landscape? Right now, an immediate pressure is thinking about what our opportunities are in these new spaces. How might the library integrate into insert an initiative in order to strengthen its position on campus and really help researchers? Let's talk a little bit about library tools. There are a lot of traditional library tools that librarians have engaged with. Electronic lab notebooks represent a new kind of library tool. And I would call library tools as tools that support the processes by which scholars conduct research, participate in the scholarly conversation in their discipline, present and publish. And so some of the standard tools that we've always engaged in as librarians have been citation managers, helping researchers harvest, organize, share, and output information. Increasingly, librarians need to know quantitative analysis software, such as SPSS, Stata, SAS, et cetera, because these are really now formidable pieces of software in the research landscape. Qualitative analysis as well, in vivo, Atlas TI, text mining. These are all tools that librarians need to grapple with as well. And then there's data visualization with programs like R, Tableau, and Banana. Digital humanities and arts present new challenges for librarians to integrate tools into their skill sets. Timeline tools, media markup tools, image and exhibit tools like ArtStore, Omeka, and et cetera. So figuring out which tools we need to know and how deeply we need to know them has always been an art. The important point here is that electronic lab notebooks are a new form of library tool that many libraries are going to have to figure out how to work with. Because they record experiments and do all the things that help a lab organize their work and lead to publication and presentation and other kinds of scholarly output, they represent a great opportunity for us to build relationships across the institution. So what were the strategic goals for Tisch Library at Tufts University as we went about helping with the implementation of electronic lab notebooks? There were a number of things we wanted to accomplish, and right off the bat we recognized this was a great opportunity to raise awareness about critical issues in scholarly communications. We wanted to get upstream in the research process, that our subject librarians who have expertise in different disciplines were able to be in on conversations with faculty and researchers early on in the planning process for research, not halfway through or towards the end of a research project. We also wanted to take the opportunity to build relationships with information technology colleagues, including folks in academic technology, research technology, GIS, research storage, and information security. We wanted to build relationships with the research administration group too, including proposal development, grant writing, compliance, and institutional review board. And we wanted to build internal knowledge and capacity around research data and related tools. We saw the electronic lab notebook project as a way to try and accomplish all of these things. How did we get started? That's the question. And so it's really important as a library to think very carefully about carving out your role. In our case, we wanted to focus on the education piece and not the training piece. However, many libraries do engage in training on the software. That's one of the two major areas of focus for libraries as they've engaged in electronic library lab notebook projects. They do training on the software, literally how to use it, and they also do the education piece, the why. They help answer the why use this product. Why should I invest my time and my lab's time? And that is a question that you will hear time and time again from researchers and lab folks across an institution. Questions that we wanted to ask: what is expected of us in this space? What can we actually provide? And what can we sustain over the course of a long period of time, given other needs? These were the essential questions we had to ask ourselves as we tried to carve out the space in this project. And what we came up with is that our role really was to help answer the why in ELN. That was the part that we really wanted to focus on. Again, many libraries will also do training. We really wanted to focus on the educational piece. We didn't have enough staff, and we're not able to sustain or scale long-term training commitment to these products. And so, again, we focused on the education piece. So how did we do that? How did we decide to focus? What was our focus? The landscape here really is scholarly communications and best practices in research data management. That became the focus of our programming. We wanted to provide an overview of why managing data is important, including discussing the funding landscape and emerging requirements, discussing the data lifecycle, helping researchers really think about all the things involved in thinking through that lifecycle early on in the process. We wanted to discuss the role metadata plays within the electronic lab notebook platform and beyond. And we wanted to discuss open data, repository services, and strategies for making data discoverable and accessible, not only for meeting emerging mandates, but for improving scientific discovery and progress. So, developing scholarly communications programming, always helpful to revisit a definition of what we're talking about when we're talking about scholarly communications. And as a librarian who thinks about these things all the time, I actually find it incredibly useful to go back to this and think about this from time to time. So it's the system through which research and other scholarly writings are created, evaluated for quality, disseminated to the scholarly community, and preserved for future use. This is essentially scholarly communications in a nutshell. This definition is by the Association of Research Libraries. So jumping off from here, we needed to know our landscape. And this is advice not just for how Tufts went about doing this, but for any library. So scholarly publishing is a complex system. It has a lot of moving parts and a lot of stakeholders. Some are driven by prestige, and some are driven by economics, and others are driven by profit, publishers. Librarians don't have access to all of these conversations, and there are a lot of embedded traditions that we'll never be able to disrupt, right? This is a landscape that is largely, or to some degree, out of our control, and sometimes we don't see it. You could probably cut all that right there. So building knowledge, what can you do to sort of integrate into this landscape and understand how to develop your programming? At the network level, librarians really need to understand the pathways researchers take from inquiry to publication. They really need to understand all the different ways that researchers, what they need to do and where they need to go to get their work done. At the local institution level, we really need to understand trends and traditions around publishing, tenure and promotion at the institution and at the discipline and the department level. There may be big differences between how different departments interpret open access, for instance, and other mandates and emerging requirements from funders. You have to be really smart with framing and messaging your ideas. Identify the critical paths in the research and publication process and deliver information relevant to those pressures that those faculty are facing today. It's not always about open access for some faculty. Be aware of local mandates, whether institution-wide or lab-specific. Some institutions have been very progressive in adopting open access mandates, and others haven't. Be very sensitive to what those traditions might be. Authors' rights, copyright, fair use, literature reviews, systematic reviews. These are all kinds of topics in this area you can develop programming around that allow you to start talking with faculty and other researchers about big issues in scholarly communications. So when it comes to actually developing and delivering your programming, think very carefully about your audience. This has to do with framing and messaging, but keep in mind, time equals money. Time equals money. Back to that research landscape. And consider this, that the most precious time on campus is actually the time of faculty. They're the ones who are under the most pressure to publish, to present, to to get more funding. Make it meaningful. Again, identify those critical pathways in the work that a PI, a researcher, a graduate student, whoever it is, needs to do. Deliver information that helps them along those pathways. Make it about them and their work and their pressures, not about the library. And look for external resources, like the New England Collaborative Data Management Curriculum, and internal insight and traditions. Go to lunch with people. Ask them questions about how things really work. Pay attention to trends. That will really help you craft your content. Above all, do your homework. Who are you presenting to? When you've got that workshop set up, who's going to be in the room? Do you know who registered? What departments are they from? What traditions in those departments might influence how you deliver that information that day? So here's a little snapshot of what we did at Tufts and the programming we developed. We really wanted to talk about electronic lab notebooks and scholarly communications being about transparency and integrity, right? So scientific progress, sharing and being open for the betterment of humankind, but also about compliance. These were systems that will help researchers comply with emerging mandates in better ways than they were able to before. And so we talked a lot about emerging mandates from some of the top funders here, the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation. And we talked about some of the actual texts that had been, publications from the government about what was expected of researchers. We talked about data management plans as the most concrete example of how the work of researchers needed to change. This was an actual deliverable now. This is an actual deliverable now for grants. Researchers need to think about that data lifecycle and construct those data management plans accordingly. So part of our programming really touched on data management plans and helping PIs and other researchers understand what was involved. We talked a lot about the data lifecycle. Again, the importance of thinking about what you're going to do with your data, not 3 or 4 circles in, but at that top circle where it says creating data. Starting to ask critical questions at that juncture in the process is something we really wanted to get across. We talked about about metadata. And one of our strategies at Tisch Library is to actually improve metadata services. We want our metadata librarians out there working with community members, whether it's taxonomy for a website or whether it's helping them identify a structure for keywords in the electronic lab notebook. We saw this as an opportunity to really push metadata services and help faculty and other folks in labs understand the role metadata can play, not only within the electronic lab notebook, but beyond. And as we like to say, metadata is a love note to the future. This always gets a good reaction. People seem to understand what that means. We talk a lot about controlled vocabularies, code books, data dictionaries, subject terms, other conventions. We talk about file naming and organization. And we talk again about metadata in the electronic lab notebook. So we try to touch on metadata from the big picture to the trench. And here are some of the slides we use to talk about metadata. And here's one where we try and get across the pitfalls of file naming. And here you can see awesome 2010 and awesomer 2010. Not the best way to code your experiments. Then we talk about metadata in the electronic lab notebooks. I mentioned this before. We really actually go into depth to help labs just start to think about how they're going to be able to organize their experiments and their work in this new software environment. And we actually provide some screenshots so that people in the room can actually start to get a sense of how much they're able to customize some of the information that they're inputting into these great programs. So here's a screenshot from the Agilent software and searchable fields that PIs can customize themselves, including project, title, status. Here's a funding source via menu and a project focus via menu. These really help PIs and other folks that are working in labs understand even more how they're going to be able to use these products to organize their work. And we showed them how you can associate metadata with an experiment using keywords. And again, this generated a lot of conversation about, well, what keywords should we be using? Should it be a free-for-all environment where anyone working in the lab can assign a keyword to an experiment? Or do we want to come up with a controlled vocabulary using MeSH or some other source to help us organize that aspect of the work? We also looked at Lab Archives, the second electronic lab notebook product at Tufts, and some of the metadata opportunities within that product. So again, just like Agilent with Lab Archives, PIs can associate experiments and things with tags and keywords. So we went through some of those screens too. So in the future, we're really looking to expand lab-based research support, and we feel like this electronic lab notebook project has really helped us be able to do that. We now have relationships with students in labs and with PIs we never worked with before because of this project. They know who we are, and they're starting to know what kind of expertise we can bring to the table. We want to look for more points of intersection. So there are initial conversations with labs to figure out, well, which electronic lab notebook is going to be right for you? We want to find a way to be part of that conversation as well. That onboarding process can bring up a lot of other pressures labs are facing and researchers are facing. We feel like librarians have a really valuable role to play alongside our partners in IT in talking with labs about their options and about all the other pressures they might be facing. We want to expand our programming around critical issues in scholarly communications using what we've already developed as a launchpad. And we're looking for more integration between electronic lab notebooks and other critical tools and platforms at the institution, such as the research administration or grant funding, grant administration system. What kind of triggers could that system have for folks working there that might help a PI or a proposal development staff member understand what resources are available elsewhere in the institution? And finally, compliance with open data policies. How can the electronic lab notebook product help? We don't know yet, but this is something that we're really trying to explore. Long story short, electronic lab notebooks and libraries present us with some wonderful opportunities. In the past, libraries were really seen as warehouses, study halls, places full of rules. Those are all fine things, and they really served our communities well. As we moved into the more present, we obviously have a landscape with more networked resources. We have a diversity of spaces. There's very much the gatekeeper to guide philosophy in libraries today. And there's really a lot of signs of deepening research and course support. In the future, what we really want to be is a curricular and co-curricular hub. Library is a place where everybody comes to do just about anything. We want to be designers and publishers. And finally, we want to go from deepening or deeper research collaborations to embedded research collaborations, where we are a partner alongside PIs, researchers, IT folks, and other critical staff at the institution. Electronic lab notebooks give libraries a great opportunity to start talking about some of the critical issues in scholarly communications, getting upstream in the research process, and serves as a great launch pad for a much more sustainable approach to working with groups across the institution.